It is a pleasure to have each and every one of you here today joining us. And I'm going to turn it over to our session host, Dr. Jared Calife.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Good evening.
There we go. So my name is Dr. Jared Calife, or just Jared. I am super excited to welcome you all to tonight's keynote panel discussion. I am one of the founding professors of the baseball program, otherwise known as the Bachelor's of Applied Science in Business and Organizational Leadership at Valencia. It's one of our few bachelor's degrees that Valencia has. And my interest area is in social entrepreneurship. So my research and much of my work is around social entrepreneurship. And I also helped found the social entrepreneurship program at Valencia. And social entrepreneurship, if you don't know, is kind of the prosper piece or the prosperity piece of sustainability, the economic business engine piece of it. The Valencia office, the Valencia College Office of Sustainability is turning 10 years old, and we're celebrating by hosting this free virtual conference for Valencia students, faculty, staff, and community members. And the conference runs from October 2nd through the 14th. So we are right in the middle. It addresses topics ranging from sustainability in our community and in higher education to environmental justice, sustainability perspectives from public policy, science, and technology. Just a quick note, this session is being recorded. It'll be also made available to folks afterwards, but just so you're aware, it's being recorded. Also, for any Valencia students that are on the call tonight or on the Zoom tonight, for each session you attend, you'll be able to be entered into a drawing for prizes at the end of the conference, which include stasher bags, portable solar chargers, and even an iPad. The more sessions you attend, the greater chances you have to win. You must be actively enrolled as a Valencia student to win. Unfortunately for us professors and community members, we're not going to be able to win the iPad. So what is sustainability? Valencia uses the Brundtland Commissions of the United Nations on March 20th, 1987, as sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So it's pretty broad. Valencia's sustainability mission and vision is to promote and execute operational practices in the service of the environment, economic, and social responsibility for current and future generations, while effectively communicating and educating about the significance of these practices for people and the planet. Our vision is to serve as a sustainability role model in our community, people plus planet plus prosperity. Our operational sustainability areas are as following: waste and recycling, energy, water, transportation, grounds, and food. And again, we are celebrating 10 years of the Office of Sustainability at Valencia. We are proud to be here putting on this virtual conference to celebrate the 10-year anniversary of the establishment of the Office of Sustainability. It was first created in the fall of 2011 with the hiring of the first sustainability director, Dr. Deborah Green, an environmental science faculty member at Valencia. Over the years, Valencia has accomplished many things within sustainability, having gone from 1 green certified building to 12, improved and expanded recycling college-wide, including winning recycling competitions, as well as increased energy efficiency, saving millions of dollars through both mechanical and behavioral changes, just to name a few. None of this, of course, was accomplished without the support of our students, faculty, and staff. Thank you to each and every one of you who has been involved in sustainability, whether it was just 10 years ago or sometime along our journey today. Thank you. Here are our sustainability objectives for the future. So what's in store for sustainability in the next 10 years and beyond? Our three primary objectives are to obtain carbon neutrality by 2050, reduce the waste the college generates, improve water conservation and stormwater management. Our largest goal is carbon neutrality, and it encompasses energy efficiency and conservation, renewables, and addressing our transportation-related emissions. So ways you can get involved. In order for us to be successful and accomplish these goals, we need your help. It takes a village. There are numerous ways to get involved. You could join a student club or get connected with SGA and the SGA Sustainability Officer on your campus. Also, there are opportunities for food waste champions to assist with our food waste recycling education at our East and West campuses. You can join our tree campus higher education committee, helping provide input to our tree care and plantings. You can keep up to date with ways to get involved in upcoming events by following us on social media. To find out more about any of these opportunities, please email sustainability@valenciacollege.edu. And now, without further ado, our presentation.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Caliquet or Jared. I am Carrie Black. I am the Director of Energy Conservation here at Valencia College, and it is a pleasure to be moderating tonight's panel, Sustainability Perspectives, a panel discussion with climate tech, policy, and science. The intent of this session is to share the work that different sectors are doing to address climate change and how they are collaborating to advance these efforts, as well as explore potential opportunities for additional partnership. Tonight, we have policy, science, and business and innovation represented. We will be discussing some of the most pressing sustainability issues, including energy, food, and transportation, and get the unique perspectives of our panelists on these topics. We will keep our discussion focused on environmental sustainability and ask that when we do open it up to questions at the end, that those questions are on this topic as well. So it is my honor to go ahead and introduce tonight's panelists. And if they will go ahead and wave when I say their name, we're going to get started with Senator Linda Stewart. Senator Stewart currently serves Florida's 13th Senate District, which encompasses Northeast Orange County. As a senator, she focuses on improving our local economy, public schools, combating climate change, and ensuring equality for all of her constituents. She's the vice chair of the Environment and Natural Resources Committee and is on the Appropriations Subcommittee on Agriculture, Environment, and General Government, which had a meeting this afternoon and which I'm sure she's rushing from to join us. So thank you for being here. And she also has previously served in the Florida House of Representatives. Senator Stewart was awarded the Commissioner Leadership Award by the Sierra Club for her work in fighting climate change. Thank you for being here. Our next panelist is Orange County Commissioner Nicole Wilson. Commissioner Wilson is a licensed attorney and represents District 1, which is Southwest Orange County. She believes that equal rights for all her people should be defended and is committed to working on behalf of the underserved members of our community. Commissioner Wilson received her bachelor's degree in psychology and human services from Mercer University and her law degree from Barry University School of Law. At Barry, she gained practice experience in the Environmental and Earth Law Clinic and went on to be named Associate Editor of the Environmental and Earth Law Journal. Commissioner Wilson is also a public school advocate and was awarded the Dolphin Living Legacy Award by Orange County Public Schools for her work. Thanks so much for being here. Our next panelist is Mr. Ben Soltoff, who is a climate tech fellow at On Deck, where entrepreneurs can come and accelerate their ideas. And he's also a contributing writer to GreenBiz. Previously, he was an environmental innovation fellow at Yale University, where he worked with students to explore how new ideas, technologies, and business models can address the world's most pressing environmental problems. Mr. Soltoff also worked as the project coordinator for the Vulnerability and Adaptation Initiative at World Resources Institute. Mr. Soltoff holds dual master's degrees from the Yale School of Management and the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Science, as well as a BS in Biology and Environmental Sciences and Policy from Duke University. Thanks so much for being here. And last but not least, our very own Professor Jim Edinski is a licensed professional geologist with more than 30 years of experience conducting water resource studies, particularly related to groundwater and springs. He has both his master's and bachelor's degree in geology from the University of Arkansas. Professor Adamski worked for 17 years with the U.S. Geological Survey, or USGS, first as a hydrologist and then as a research geochemist. He's been a full-time faculty professor of geology at Valencia East Campus since 2010, and he would say that this is the best job ever, where he also serves as advisor to the Valencia Earth Studies Association, or VESA, a student environmental club, and mentors students conducting undergraduate research. He's also a board member of Friends of the Volcanoes River, a local environmental organization advocating for the protection and enjoyment of the Volcanoes River and its springs, and he was recently elected president of this group. Thank you so much to all of our panelists for being here. So to get started, I'm going to ask each of our panelists a sector-specific question, and then we'll move into broader questions, opening it up to the entire panel. So we're going to get started with Professor Adamski. So Professor Adamski, the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, came out this summer with their 6th assessment report, or AR6. Can you share with us some of the major findings in this report?
Thank you, Carrie. Yeah, I'd be happy to. I've got a few pictures. It just helps to see. So these assessments reports, this is the 6th one. They started out in the 1990s. And these are, this is literally thousands of climate scientists from all around the world volunteering their time to be able to go over the cutting edge science for climate change. And I went over the summary report for policymakers, which itself was like 42 pages long. So that gives you, and here are some of the highlights of that. Is that basically they determined that climate change is unequivocally caused by human beings, by our burning of fossil fuels primarily, putting what we call greenhouse gases up into the atmosphere, and that these this warming of the atmosphere is causing many of the extreme weather events that we've seen in the past few years: droughts, floods, Hurricane Ida that came through and hit the Gulf Coast. There's something called climate sensitivity. I won't go into that, but it's basically how much we expect the climate to warm with a doubling of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And they're narrowed it down to 3 degrees warming, which doesn't sound like a lot, but on a worldwide scale, that is an incredible amount. And then finally, basically, and this is probably one of the most disturbing things that they put in there, was that they said even our best case scenarios for reducing emissions will allow will cause the climate to continue to warm till mid-century, and will reach 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels by mid-century, and 2 degrees by the end of this century. This is called the Keeling curve, and this is carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Pre-industrial levels carbon dioxide, it was about 278. Now we're at 415 or so. And as you can see, this isn't a straight line. So carbon dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas, it traps heat in the atmosphere, is increasing, and it's increasing at an increasing rate. So it's basically accelerating. And this is what we want to stop. We want to stop these emissions, or at least curtail these emissions significantly. And this is warming of the atmosphere that's happened since the Industrial Revolution. And we can see, particularly since about 1960, 1970, that the global median air temperatures increased drastically. The report says that the global air temperature has increased about 1.07 degrees Celsius since pre-industrial times. And again, that doesn't sound like a lot, 1 degree, but it is enough to cause ocean acidification, extremes in weather events like hurricanes, droughts, floods, wildfires. And this puts it a little bit more in perspective. The bars show average air temperature per year from going back to 1880 to the present. And this gray line shows CO2 in the atmosphere increasing. So you can see that there's a nice correlation here between increasing CO2 and increasing temperatures going back. And, you always got to be careful. Correlation is not necessarily causation, but the fact that CO2 is a greenhouse gas, meaning it traps heat, has been known since the mid-1850s by an American scientist, Eunice Foote, and simultaneously discovered by an Irish physicist, John Tyndall. Thank you. Had a senior moment there for a second. Okay, and this is basically air temperatures in 2020 above the 1951 to 1980 baseline. So you can see it's not an even warming of the atmosphere. Some places, particularly the Arctic, is warming a lot faster than the rest of the globe. And this is like the last 2,000 years, I guess, showing that the air temperature was basically kind of holding its own or even decreasing a little bit until you get to the Industrial Revolution. And then particularly the last 50 or 60 years, boom, it's really shot up. This graph on the right is really important. This came out of the report, and that similar studies have been done to this. These bottom two lines, or this bottom line right here with the this shading is some basically error bars. And what this shows is what the air temperature, what they did a computer model, and this is what the global air temperature would be without human activity. So you can basically see that it's, cooled a little bit and sometimes, but basically remained fairly flat for the last over 150, 170 years. And then this red line and this heavy black line, the red line is the simulated air temperatures that result from adding human activities, such as the burning of fossil fuels. And the black line is the actual observed temperatures. So this basically verifies that it is indeed CO2, that there are no other natural factors that can cause this warming. And one thing that the report said was that the greenhouse gases could be warming the atmosphere right now, currently, as much as 2 degrees Celsius. But we're actually getting some cooling of the atmosphere as a result of air pollution, primarily coal-fired power plants in places like China and India, where those power plants are very polluting, much like we had 50, 60 years ago in this country. And they put out a couple of different types of pollutants. They put out nitrogen oxides and sulfur dioxide, and those have a tendency to reflect sunlight. And so what's happening is that those air pollutants, ironically, are cooling the earth at the same time that the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is warming the earth. Now, if China and India were to clean up their coal-fired power plants and remove these pollutants from the emissions, then we might expect to see a jump in warming, which is what we saw in the United States. If you look right here at about 1970, that's when the Clean Air Act was passed. And you can see that the warming is kind of slow until you get to 1970, and the air pollution from the United States and Europe is significantly improved. And you get this really massive jump in warming after that. And then this is showing you different emission scenarios. I won't go into what these are. These two best case scenarios down here, the SP1s, are pretty much off the table. It's unlikely that they will get them. But the good news is that these worst case scenarios probably are also not likely to happen. So we're probably looking at this SSP2 4.5, maybe the 7.0. But in any of these cases, what I mentioned earlier is that even in the best case emission reductions, we're still looking at about a 1.5 degrees Celsius warming by mid-century. And again, as much as a 2-degree warming Celsius by the end of this century. So that finishes up my summary of that.
Thank you, Professor Adamski. So it sounds like, by mid-century, we're looking at 1.5 degrees Celsius and potentially.
It's almost a certainty.
And, COP26 is coming up here, the meeting of the parties, the UN meeting coming up in Glasgow in November, where they're going to be talking about how we can, keep the warming around 1.5 and under 2 degrees Celsius. So that will be great data for those national leaders to have at their fingertips for that discussion that will be coming up here later this fall. So our next question is going to be for both Senator Stewart and Commissioner Wilson. So as we hear about the findings from this 6th assessment report, here at home in Florida, what are a few things that are being done to help reduce our carbon emissions in order to lessen the severity of climate change and its effect on our community?
You want me to start, Senator Stewart?
I think
on mute. Florida has really taken a leading role in supporting the growing electric automobile infrastructure. The legislature has been friendly to adopting new rules on the technology. We have funded the technology and the appropriate stations that need to be put into place in order for us to increase our electric automobile products. And we will continue to do that. And it is very costly, but we just need to do it. And I think too that the greenhouse gas emissions, it is really all in the transportation network. There's so many things that we can do to improve that and bring it down to a much better condition. We have also been highlighting the need for renewable energies, and much of the energy policy has shifted to encouraging investor-owned utilities, as well as transitioning renewable energy sources such as solar. We also have hired a resiliency officer to try to keep track of all of the different ways that we can reduce the emissions and also be more environmentally friendly.
perfect. Thank you, Senator Stewart. Commissioner Wilson?
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me to this. I get, my geeky panel face on because I enjoy so much hearing from other experts and policymakers. So thank you so much for having me. So sort of as a broad policy position, I think that we have to, and at all levels of government, change the way we treat our natural environment in the name of, and I'm going to do the loose quotes, I know it's really lame, but progress, because there's the idea of the tragedy of the commons, that things like water and the air are somehow, not quantifiable in a way that's considered an asset for the public or for, even for our business partners. But really what we now know is that they are. And so understanding that and looking forward, having to really commodify what the impact is when a hard growth of forest is flattened. I think there's always been this sort of idea that was something that we pay for the aesthetics. We clear cut something, or we paid for it. The tree fund was for replacement saplings. But the reality of it is that we don't know, or we haven't identified areas, at least not here in Orange County, that every time they do a clear cut, what we're giving up in carbon sequestration. And that's commodifiable as long as we can, get the right people to do that for us. So it's been really sort of the, number one thing that I got here and said, okay, if we're going to continue doing this ridiculous clear cutting, which I'm working on trying to keep from happening, but if we're going to do it, we got to figure out exactly how to pay for it in a carbon sense, because right now the nominal amounts that are put into tree funds aren't doing anything to offset that carbon loss. I mean, we have what really is the perfect sequestration tool in a tree, and very little in the way of protection. So right now, out of my office, there is an ongoing workshop with administration that's going to be brought forward to the commission in a tree ordinance to try to help really articulate some of the differences in what we have in growth trees, and being able to get some kind of a mapping system, among other ideas for permitting if there's a taking, that kind of thing. And then, gosh, probably the other one that's really important from this office that we try really hard every single day to work on is design. So, you know, if we think about so much of our carbon footprint is because of transportation, then why are we putting all of our growth all at the farthest ends of our community, with all of our economic drivers somewhere way on the inside, where I think from Horizon West to most large economic drivers, something between a 24 and 27-minute drive. You know, even if we are really aggressively switching over to electric vehicles, we still are really contributing right there with our footprint, because we're also having to add lanes, which once again, you know, it's a design flaw that contributes. So Vision 2050, which is the update to Orange Code and the Orange County Comprehensive Plan, contemplates really more centers of growth that include the walkability, bikeability, so multimodal transportation, as well as trying to make sure there's a work here, play here, school here setting, so that we're not putting people in a dependency cycle with an automobile, and we're not continuing to eat up every last piece of natural climate sequestration that we have. I know that was a really long answer to that question, but I love this topic, so I could keep talking about it.
No, that is great. And that lots of things that we can come back to as we move further on the panel. And there might even be some segue even with climate tech. So Mr. Soltoff, the next question is for you. Many have heard of clean tech, but not as many have heard of climate tech. Can you share with us what climate tech is, how it is different from clean tech, and then also a few examples?
Yeah, happy to do that. I'm thrilled to be here. I have the least direct connection to Central Florida, but I'm always happy to help students. A lot of what my work has been helping students from all sorts of backgrounds work on climate change and work on technologies to address climate change. And that's essentially what climate tech is. You can kind of think of it in a Venn diagram of the intersection between work to address climate change and anything you might think of as tech. That includes, you know, the work of big tech companies, you know, social media, internet technology, but also smaller startups. And there's a lot of different ways that technology can be used to address climate change. The one most immediately that may come to mind is how we generate energy and electricity. You can think of wind and solar as some of the most prominent forms of climate tech, but there's also a whole bunch of other energy generation technologies being considered that would also fall under climate tech, advanced forms of nuclear energy, geothermal energy, tidal energy, lots of ways to generate electricity. Also the built environment, how buildings can be more energy efficient, how they can incorporate solar and other electricity technologies, how they can collect information in a way that allows them to operate in a way that uses less energy and puts less emissions. And where I'm going to give a few more examples, but where this all comes back to is what Professor Adamski was talking about, is these creeping and climbing levels of emissions and the connections that has to climate impact. And at the end of the day, what climate tech is aiming to do is to reduce emissions or respond to the world that we're in when we've got higher emissions, and to respond to some of those impacts. Materials is another big element of it, how we make things, how we make the chemicals for industrial process, how we make the things that you use every day, how you can do that in a way that puts out less emissions. The way that we use land, both forests and also agricultural land, and the ways that further down in the food system that gets to the food that's on your plate, that is also a major source of emissions. And that is also part of climate tech. So that can be, soil carbon management technologies, the carbon that is stored within soils, but it can also be the consumer facing part of those things. There's a lot of emissions that come from meat. And so, different alternative forms of proteins or ways to capture methane and other greenhouse gases from cattle and other animal livestock are also in this general category of climate tech. And a really big area of climate tech is information technology. There's all of these satellites out there. You can build crazy small technologies to take satellite images and videos. How can we use all that data and information that's out there? And there's all kinds of artificial intelligence that can analyze that very, very quickly and just take in massive amounts of information. So how can we use that to more smartly reduce emissions? And how can we also use that to predict the impacts of climate change? So the first couple of clarifications that I want to make to that kind of overview. One is directly addressing the question of climate tech versus clean tech. They're often used interchangeably. There's a lot of overlap between them. Some of it is just kind of the era. Clean tech was used really prominently about 10 years ago, and it focused primarily on energy and electricity. A lot of startups developed during that time, some successful. Tesla is a prominent example of a clean tech startup that remains, as many of you know, very, very successful. But many were not. The expectations of a lot of investors were similar to their expectations for software and some of the other things that were coming out of Silicon Valley. And for a number of reasons, energy and environmental technologies don't always work in that way. They can be profitable, but they're not always profitable on the same time frame. And they're not always profitable with kind of a minimal amount of funds. You can't always just fund, a couple undergraduates in their garage who come up with a multi-billion-dollar company. Sometimes it takes a lot more money up front to develop an entirely new energy technology. And so there was a little bit of a pushback against clean tech. Investment world walked away from it from a long time. And as Professor Adamski's slides showed, there's not a lot of time. So climate tech has since come to be the more common term. I personally prefer it because clean tech is a little vague. What exactly is clean? What isn't clean? Climate tech ties these technologies to the overall mission, which is addressing climate change, either mitigating its effects or adapting to those effects. And then one more distinction I want to make while I have the floor here is between development of new technologies and deployment of existing technologies. And both of these fall under climate tech, but I think it's an important distinction to make. And it's not a one or the other sort of thing. We need to be doing both of these things at the same time. But development of new technologies, those next generation nuclear technologies I was talking about, it can be developing machines that absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. There's a lot of technologies that can be really helpful in addressing climate change that don't exist yet. So there's a big part that's development. But another part of this world of climate tech is deployment of things that we already have. Wind and solar are pretty established. They're becoming much, much cheaper, but we can get those technologies out faster using our other technologies, making it really easy for people to use an app on their phone to get solar on their rooftop. And that information technology, how do we use this immense power of data that we have to solve some of our key challenges? That's also climate tech. So just want to clarify, when you're thinking of developing new technology, sometimes someone in a lab developing something that's never been seen before, and sometimes it's a bunch of engineers and business people putting their scale hats on and thinking, how do we take these technologies that we already have and get them to a much wider scale to address some of our challenges. So that answer kind of was a little all over the place, and that's because climate tech really encapsulates a bunch of different technologies. And I think that it's an umbrella. And I'll share a resource in the chat that explains it a little bit further that I put together while I was at Yale. And there's a lot of things that you can put under that umbrella. And there's a lot of things that can directly or indirectly affect and make an impact in addressing climate change. And I think it's great that those are all under this umbrella of climate tech.
Thank you, Mr. Soltoff. That was great. That does really represent even sustainability, how it is all encompassing. It touches everything in climate change, touches everything. It affects every area of our lives. And I want to kind of follow up with that. So Commissioner Wilson mentioned sequestration, carbon sequestration with trees and looking at a tree ordinance. And one area too in climate tech is also carbon capture and sequestration. And so I want to open this up to the panel, and maybe Professor Adamski can kind of give us a quick primer in carbon capture and sequestration. And then love to kind of hear about each area's perspectives on sequestration, the different areas. So it's either biological and trees or geological. So in rock formations, ways to store this carbon that you remove from the atmosphere. But so kind of throwing it out there, Professor Adamski, if you'll kind of get us started with a definition, and then we'll go from there.
Oh, thank you, Carrie. Yeah. All right. So carbon capture and sequestration is the idea that you capture carbon either at the tailpipe, quote unquote tailpipe. You could be, but we're really talking about something like a coal-fired power plant, and somehow capture it, put it into the ground, or using some kind of plant that's going to extract carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and again, doing something with it, putting it underground. Trees obviously have been doing this for hundreds of millions of years, and they've got the technology down pat. I'm not an expert in the technology on the actual getting it out of the atmosphere. My understanding is it's very difficult to do. And right now, humans are putting up close to 40 gigatons. That's 40 billion tons of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere every year. If you had one plant that captured 1,000 tons, well, let's say one plant that captured 1 million tons, you would need 1,000 of those plants around the planet to capture just 1 gigaton. And we got 40 gigatons up in the air. As far as the geology goes, putting it underground, or I'm not sure what other options there are with that. Our engineers can probably speak better to that. But geology is not permanent. I am skeptical of any rock formation that's going to, permanently store that, or even store it for, maybe hundreds of years to come. One thing we see, many of you probably have heard of the process called fracking or hydraulic fracturing when they drill oil wells, which is to pump fluids down underground to fracture the rock to extract oil. And one of the side effects of that is earthquakes in places like Kansas and Oklahoma. So I can imagine we would expect similar kind of things from trying to pump huge amounts of carbon dioxide underground. But that's my take, and I'll turn it over to somebody else who has more technical aspects to it.
I don't have the full technical background on it, but I've put on my science journalist hat and written about it. I was actually just not too long ago visiting a new direct air capture plant that opened in Iceland.
Right.
And they also have the sequestration there. The Iceland geology, if any geology is good at it, is because it's new rock and you can pump to my understanding, it does take up fairly quickly in this porous basalt that comes from recent volcanic geology. That doesn't exist everywhere, but it also exists in places outside of Iceland, particularly Hawaii, other parts of Europe. So there are places where you can be more confident that it's going to be stored. Also on the direct air capture side, I'll make one minor quibble with what Professor Adamski said. It's not necessarily that it's challenging to capture the carbon, it's just expensive. There are now companies that can do it. What's challenging is capturing it at scale for not, basically infinite money. If we had infinite money, it would be super easy, but we don't. And that's where the challenge comes in right now with those carbon capture technologies. A lot of times the proven and widely available technology of the tree is much better at doing that, much shorter in the near term. I think where the issues with that come are, if you're thinking of massive scale, the land, you don't want to incentivize forest plantations. A forest doesn't always look like these wonderful, national parks with diverse trees. If you're just trying to optimize planting as many trees as possible, sometimes that can just mean rows and rows and rows of pine plantations. And you don't want to take away land from other purposes like growing food, from indigenous cultures that have been there for a long time, using the land for all sorts of other purposes. So when you talk about planting trees, it's important to think about, what kind of trees are you planting? What does that look like? Certainly the best thing to do right now is to conserve the thriving ecosystems that we already have and keep those conserved. That is great. But also, once you create those incentives, making sure that, if money is going to conserve an ecosystem, that it wasn't already going to that money is actually doing something. Because sometimes you can create these markets where someone is receiving money to not chop down a forest that they were never going to chop down. So then someone else is polluting from a coal plant. The forest was never going to get chopped down in the first place, and this money has been spent and essentially wasted. So that those are issues that are coming up in some of those markets. They can be solved with better monitoring and evaluation, better information. This gets to where the information technology fits in. I've worked with a company that does more dynamic markets, because there's some markets where you have to have landowners promise not to chop down trees for 100 years. That's a really long time. You've got the next generation in a small family farm coming in that just can't promise it, or if they do promise it, they may not uphold it. And so they've developed a year-to-year market that's a little bit more reasonable. And the actual value of the stored emissions is lower, but at least it's more realistic that it's going to be stored. So that there's all kinds of issues that come up in any kind of carbon storage and carbon capture and sequestration, whether it's natural methods, whether it's engineered methods. And to kind of get back to this IPCC report, because that's always a great place to start when talking about climate. If you look at the IPCC models, particularly holding emissions to 1.5 degrees, but even 2 degrees, all of those models factor in some amount of carbon capture and sequestration. So that means that even if we do as much as possible to reduce the emissions that are coming from elsewhere, there's going to be some need to capture and sequester. And that may be able to come from forests. It may be able to come from the engineered solutions, probably some combination. But this is thinking ahead decades, and so it's important to have these options that are reliable and that are available to scale at that point. So that's why it makes sense to work on some of these further down the line things like this crazy project in Iceland, and also to be doing everything that we can with ecosystems in the short term.
I'd like to comment as well. I'm opposed to fracking, always have been, and we've kept it out of the Senate and the House. We've had people who are very much in favor of fracking. I'm opposed to it. I'm opposed to anything that we pump underground because of our aquifer in Florida. I don't know what the consequences would be, and we have so little available good water through the aquifer. I wouldn't want to do anything that would interfere with the aquifer. So I'm not that science-based in what pumping carbon underground might do, but it doesn't sound real good. So I would have to hear more about that. And we have a lot of space along the highways all throughout Florida where we can plant trees, and we should go ahead and do that. I have a bill also for putting more trees along our highways, because that's land we own and there's no reason not to use it for that method. No one thing is going to help. Every little bit may help. So I'm for doing what we can.
And I was going to piggyback on that by saying that sometimes I get concerned about the loss of some of the kind of the natural scape forests when we're looking for places for those large solar arrays. And I'm so excited about the Sunshine State finally making good on its promise of sunshine for energy. But, you look at opportunities where it wouldn't impact existing forest and along the highways throughout Florida really is the best opportunity. And there's, I would say even rooftops at this point, because I know that's a more difficult thing as far as being able to navigate sort of the property rights with people. But, there's a trade-off when we go to solar, that we need a certain amount of space, and that we also have to deal with, solar components are not yet recyclable, and how to get through that. So there's, you got to squeeze it from different ends, and like Senator Stewart said, hope that you're getting somewhere in addressing it in every policy.
Absolutely. And even with carbon capture and sequestration, it's, one of the tools in the toolbox. Energy efficiency and reducing our emissions, in addition to trying to remove carbon, it's kind of that holistic looking at the problem, and every little bit will help. So Commissioner Wilson, you also mentioned about renewable energy in the Sunshine State. So I think that's a great segue into a question about energy. So emissions from electricity consumption is the second largest source of greenhouse gas emissions nationally. So what is being done to support energy efficiency, as well as assisting residents and businesses to transition to renewable energy? And throwing it out there.
Yeah, I can tell you just a couple. This could be another whole night, but off the top of my head, right now we're actually working on an ordinance for CPACE funding, which is basically will provide funding for commercial businesses to be able to leverage a different type of financing in order to get better energy efficiency in their commercial entity. And there, seems to be, as we started studying this and the opportunities for that CPACE funding, there seems to be a wide variety of uses. We're not getting into the residential component of it at this time. I think there had been some concern about some predatory finance practices, but when you look at the commercial side of it and understanding those commercial entities and how much energy efficiency costs when you're trying to catch up, right? When you have an old building or you have some kind of a structural difference. And in Florida, we obviously lose a certain amount every day to, when you think about trying to cool down a building. And so hopefully seeing some of the commercial entities get different financial options that will help benefit their business. Hopefully we can start seeing some more efficiency there. We also have the SELF program where there's the co-ops that are out there for solar, residential solar. And you drive around now and it's so different than it was 5 years ago or 10 years ago, seeing how much residential solar has really grown in the area. And, being able to have an electric car now that I can charge overnight on my solar array feels a little bit like a rebellion to the system. So it's slowly but surely we're seeing progress in that front, but there's still a lot of work to do.
Would any of the other panelists like to talk about that as well?
Well, I do think too that the energy efficiency can be accomplished by zoning. And sometimes, of course, that is out of my purview, because I don't think the state should tell the counties and cities what to do. So I think that you need to look at those cities and counties and make sure that their zoning is taking into consideration how efficient the new buildings or even renovated buildings might help reduce the carbon. So I think that's another area where I think Commissioner Wilson would be more in tune to dealing with that, but I do think it would help.
Well, it's really cool here in Orlando. There's a Chris Castro actually initiated a program that an analogy really would be if you go to buy your car and you can see the sticker on the outside of what the fuel mileage is, a energy efficiency version of that for a building, a large building downtown, so that people going into a lease understand exactly what they're getting into as far as the energy efficiency. And obviously that's, there's a consumer protection component to that, but there's an overall market force component to that. When you see that it's going to be more appealing for the building owner, the builder themselves to make it energy efficient, knowing that that's going to be part of what they market to a potential leasee. So it's just a different way of coming forward with an incentive that isn't necessarily a financial incentive. It's a, put the sticker on the front of it. Let's see if it increases your marketability out there in the world. And it does, because people don't want to pay higher utility bills. And as a result, we end up also benefiting from the efficiency and the lower carbon footprint.
Senator Stewart, I know that back in the spring, you put forth a renewable energy goals bill within your committee, and wanted to see if you could talk a little bit more about that.
I did not catch that whole question.
Oh, yeah. So back in the spring, looks like you put forth a renewable energy goals bill within your committee, and I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about that.
Last year?
In April, it was in committee in April.
Oh, in April.
Yeah.
I don't know which one you're referring to. I've got so many out there. I'll have to look and see what, I don't remember putting it out as a bill with a number on it.
Well, it looks like it was in committee and it did not get past committee, but with that
Oh.
prohibiting. Yeah, the drilling and
That
exploration, that one.
Possibly so true. But when, there is a financial impact, they don't necessarily agree with what you're trying to do. And it probably had a fiscal impact and they weren't ready to support that. Most of the bills that didn't get through last year, I'm refiling this year. So whichever one that was will probably be refiled. I'm doing the same thing with plastics and styrofoam and all the other things that, I haven't been successful in getting a hearing on. Paper bags and plastic bags versus paper bags. And, there's so many things that I file that just doesn't really get through. It's a little disappointing, but some things that I have filed definitely does, like Florida Forever program. I've been, I get 100 million a year. We should get 300, but I'm lucky to get the 100 million. Some people say, well, we need 500 million. Well, I can't even get the 100 most of the time. So let's stick with trying to get what we can get. But Florida Forever is a big program that helps all of us in putting aside our conservation lands and not building on it. And so I got a lot of bills out there that is going to be reintroduced this year. And I don't know how they're going to be taken in the committees, but I do serve on 2 committees. And I have a pretty good relationship with the chairman of those committees. So I'll just be working them again. So I'd have to look at the bill you're talking about because so many of them didn't get all the way through. And I'll be happy to do that.
Senator Stewart, I just want to thank you as somebody who really supports the Florida Forever initiative. And I know you're up against so many special interests up there in battling this battle. So I want to thank you for your work in Tallahassee. I think about my challenges here and I get frustrated sometimes and I think, okay, you know what? I'm not in Tallahassee. That would be really frustrating. So thank you for everything you do. And we actually try to mimic, or there's a county version of that Florida Forever. We have the Green Place Initiative, which is for the first time in 12 years, is fully funded at the county level for Green Place investments in environmentally sensitive lands. And so that will include some of those corridors, wildlife corridors, and there's lots of properties right now that are in evaluation, and it hadn't been funded for a very, very long time. But because voters, really spoke out loud and clear about Florida Forever, and then again about the 2 amendments here in Orange County, there was a political appetite finally to make that investment. So, it does feel like frustration, I'm sure, seeing those bills get filed and sit, but there is movement with those things, and really knowing that the voters so overwhelmingly approved that type of conservation investment just, should energize all of us to keep on that path.
We did get this year 300 million put in for corridor purchase and wildlife corridor purchases, and we have purchased a few corridors already. So that was part of our meeting that we had today. They tried to explain how much money went out and what they purchased. So we're making some headway, but so we have 100 million in Florida Forever and 300 million in wildlife corridor purchases. So that's better than we've ever had. And I don't know if we can do it again this year, but we're going to try. Every time we get at the beginning of the year, they tell us we have no money. So that's the first thing they say. And then we work ourselves down to the end and then, oh, we found some money. So isn't that great? So I'm in, we don't have any money territory right now.
Well, thank you for
Senator Stewart. Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to say, Senator Stewart, I also would like to thank you on behalf of Friends of the Wekiva River for Florida Forever and your work on that. So.
Oh, well, you're welcome, and keep the emails coming. I need your help.
Okay, we'll do our best.
Okay.
For students who might not know what Florida Forever is, can someone give us a brief overview, quick summary of what it is?
Senator Stewart, you want to explain it? I mean, it's an investment in conservation land, and it was approved, overwhelmingly approved by voters in Florida. So it was a ballot initiative. And, you know, unfortunately, what happens in Florida is that the voters speak really strongly about something in a ballot initiative that becomes a part of our Constitution, but then they turn around and vote people in sometimes, not Senator Stewart, but some people that have very diametrically opposed ideas. And so they get there and try to either manipulate the funding for it or somehow dilute what was the original intent of the measure. And so this one, you know, is so straightforward, right? This is just an investment in conservation land, and it's something that should be, you know, a very, I feel like, don't tinker with this one. This one is very, I understand some of them are a little tricky in the wording, but this one's very straightforward. So stay the course.
What they did and had done in the past, and a little bit is still there, but they would split Florida Forever up into 3 or 4 different categories, like land trust, and we get some of the money, and you know, a real estate operation, we get some of the Florida Forever money, and there wasn't any left for the Florida Forever, just a bit, maybe 50 million or something, you know. So now I think we've kind of removed some of those 5 or 6 different pots of money and tried to get it down to just 1 or 2. So it's been last year a little easier to keep the money in Florida Forever, but that's what happens. You vote for it and then they find all these places they want to put your money.
Learning about policymaking. So as we're talking about land, Mr. Soltoff also alluded to, you know, using land for also growing food and feeding people. So I kind of want to transition us to food and the impacts that climate change can have on our food systems. So climate change causes severe weather, such as droughts, flooding, and record temperatures, having significant consequences on our food system, from production, nutritional value, distribution, and cost. Agriculture is both the culprit and the victim of climate change. So what is being done across, you know, all the areas represented here to address the impact that climate change is having on our food system, from the distance food is traveling and trying to support local, to technology and everything in between?
I can start here just with very exciting, and it was something that was sort of long coming. We finally got our backyard chicken ordinance passed, which I know doesn't sound like at first glance that it would be something that contributes to this conversation about climate, but it really does when you think about the sustainability and sort of, you know, the supply chain and where our food sources are coming from. The idea of being able to do gardening on any side of your house, on your roof, on your patio, and being able to have your own protein source right there. You know, during the public hearings for the backyard chicken ordinance, there was a family that came in who moved into unincorporated Orange County from somewhere that they were able to have chickens. And the mother said, I fed 4 boys, you know, I had 10 eggs, full protein for a day, every single day during, you know, power was out, there was a storm, and they didn't have to worry about it. And to me, that was the most compelling conversation about, you know, it's a great educational tool, but it's also a really important tool to sustainably considering how our residents, can feed themselves. They can shorten the distance between them and whatever that that protein source is, and we all get a benefit from that. So we're still working on some of the gardening aspects, and hopefully we're going to be able to see some changes in those ordinances. Overcoming HOAs in local government in Florida it's very difficult because they're like small governments, and so there's a lot of prohibitions about things like a front yard or side yard garden. And clearly backyard chickens is something that's prohibited by many, or if not all HOAs. So, we have a lot of things to overcome in the educational component of what the benefits of that type of food sustainability in trying to push forward those ordinances.
I can talk a little bit about the science of that, Carrie, if you'd like. Okay, so food is a huge issue. It will be a huge issue coming up. I did see one article I haven't had a chance to read that food production, clearing of land for food production is one of the #1 causes of the decrease in biodiversity. And a lot of that's coming from livestock agriculture. So I think one of the big things is we really need, as a society and as a globally as a people, to move away from animal products in our diet. And so, but there is a more disturbing thing too, is that productivity of corn, wheat, rice, and soybeans all decrease with increasing temperatures. So as the climate warms, these plants are producing fewer and fewer seeds, which is what we eat from them. So that will be a challenge on top of the extreme weather events that you mentioned when you asked about the question. So yeah, I think there are some, obviously work is being done on, coming up with different strains of crops and stuff. I'm not an expert on this by any means. And then also some cool stuff done, growing crops vertically in buildings as opposed to, spread out over huge tracts of land. So there is hope.
And I know UF IFAS is even looking more at that kind of vertical indoor growing, because we're going to be running out of land for farms in this area as we develop and grow. I'd love to check in with Mr. Soltoff and see about the climate tech perspective on this.
Yeah, a few points that I can share. I mean, first of all, on both the food and renewable energy, those are two of the biggest areas to make an impact. And so much of that work is done at the state and local level. So many thanks to to Commissioner Wilson and Senator Stewart. It's great to hear that they're championing policies at those levels. That's so important. New technology and solutions can only get so far, and that without the support of local leaders. And so I think that's really critical. One area that we haven't discussed yet in food that is a huge impact is food waste. So I mentioned, we talked about the agriculture, growing of food, the whole process of preparing food, types of proteins and where they're coming from. Then there's what happens to the food afterwards. And, when food decomposes, that releases various greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Depending on how it decomposes, that affects how potent those greenhouse gases are. But the best way to avert those is to reduce food waste. And so to either, it's not just bugging people like your mom to eat all the food on your plate. It's also throughout the process, making sure that things get used, converting things that are otherwise byproducts into useful products. I worked with a company called Renewable Mill that realized that a whole part of the process of making tofu was just diverting a lot of the soybean flour. And they started selling the soybean flour as a flour substitute and making cookies and other pastries out of it. You can find them at a lot of grocery stores. And they turn that into a useful product. And this is tied to a concept called circular economy, which is basically not just having things linear, you use it, throw it away, but figuring out where in various processes you can take things that are otherwise useful and finding a use for it. And there's a win-win there, because these waste products you would often have to pay to get disposed of suddenly become a source of revenue. So, the more that these opportunities can be taken advantage of, the better. And so the food waste is a big part of this. And The last thing I want to say about food, I've worked with a lot of student entrepreneurs. I've worked with a lot of students who are passionate about climate change. And the number one thing that I find students most excited about when they want to get their hands dirty with their own solution is related to food, whether it's agriculture, whether it's food products, whether it's food waste. And I think it's because food is something that's so personal. There's so much culture and society that's wrapped up in it. It's fun to make a product that affects how people eat. And it's just tangible. It's something that people can literally and figuratively sink their teeth into. And so there's a lot of solutions needed and also a lot of energy and excitement around food. So I'm glad that's part of this conversation.
I have a question for Ben. If you, I don't know, I believe there was a power plant or some kind of a supplemental power plant somewhere in the area that was using food waste from the theme parks or convention center. But I think I don't know what happened to it, but it was something that was very, I felt very optimistic to me. And then I tried to find it again online to find out what was going on, because I remember it opening. Do you have any information about those type of sources of energy, the food waste?
Food in particular, I'm not sure. I know waste to energy, so I mentioned the circular economy. How can you make the most use of waste? There's kind of a hierarchy. If you can turn it into a product, something that's really high value, that's great. And whatever emissions were going to come from something that would decompose or then stored in that product. Slightly lower in the hierarchy is burning it, which is often what you have to do when you get energy, because there are still emissions from it, but then you're not using a fossil fuel to create that energy. So it's still a net benefit compared to using fossil fuels, but it's not quite as good as turning it into another more useful product. And then the worst is just directly throwing it out. So I'm not so familiar with this particular project that you're talking about, but in general, you can think of incinerating something and using it as energy as a way of turning it into a useful product. It's just kind of lowest on the totem pole of uses because of those emissions calculations.
Oh, I'm seeing somebody. Okay, somebody has the answer. It closed.
That
Oh,
was it.
wow. Okay, that's good to know.
Anaerobic digester, harvest power on Disney properties.
That was it. Yes.
Yep. And unfortunately, the pandemic didn't end. So now even the city of Orlando, which was using that for their commercial food waste diversion program,
Okay.
is now sending it for composting.
Well, thank you for solving the mystery for me. Awesome. All right. Well, I mean, not totally awesome, because I would have liked to have seen it successful, but at least there's a function there.
Talking about having infinite funds, as Mr. Soltoff mentioned earlier, the plant and the facility is still there. We just need a buyer and somebody to operate it. But so great conversation. We're getting close to our Q&A, so I just want to ask one more question for sure. Valencia College, our students are looking at their career paths and where they want to go, and also how they can get experience and how they can get involved. We've talked about numerous areas tonight. And so what can college students do to get involved with these different sustainable initiatives that we've discussed, and how can they best help this climate crisis? So how can our students get involved of what we've heard tonight?
I started the last one, but I'll go again first. I will say that there are a bazillion different levels where they can get involved, which is I think one of the most optimistic portions of this conversation, because I have my vote necklace on right now. So you think about the policies that we're just talking about, and whether or not your local, state, federal government reflects what you realize is potentially the most important issue of your lifetime. You can get involved there. But on top of it, there are groups out there, Fleet Farming is one of them, that go into communities and do gardens so that they can have a community garden and don't have to try to find, don't jump in a car and go across town to get their fresh produce. And so from top to bottom, there are, depending on what the interest is, there's so many great opportunities. And if you want to share my information, I can connect them to some of those advocacy groups, because I came from that side. And we are always really encourage students here. Also, I have an internship program, so it's something I think actually my first 3 months. I had a Valencia student as an intern here. So it was, it's always just a pleasure to be able to get that the perspective I learn every time that I speak with anybody that's in, that stage of their life. So, I would encourage them to plug in wherever they think it's going to be exciting.
Shameless
Yeah.
plug.
I was going
Our-
to say, I'll echo Commissioner Wilson's comments, and that, yeah, there's all kinds of different levels. Obviously, I'm going to plug Friends of the Wakava River here. So we're always looking for, and I think I can speak for most small environmental organizations that we're stretched pretty thin right now. So we can always use people to write letters or come out and, do river cleanups or whatever, and then of course, voting is a big thing. And then lifestyle changes like your diet. So lots and lots of ways.
I can add up here too. From the climate tech side of things, there is a lot of money being invested in climate technologies, which means that companies that are working on this are hiring, and that's really fantastic. And I don't just mean they're hiring climate experts, the kind of scientists and technical people. They'll hire people who understand software. They're hiring people to do marketing and communications and business roles, operations. After I finish talking, I'll post a few job boards on the chat. If you're looking to work for a company, for an organization, for someone who is doing something meaningful to address climate change, there are more opportunities to do that than maybe ever before. So if you are kind of thinking about internships, thinking about jobs, even jobs, straight out of college after you finish your degree, they're out there. So definitely check out these job boards, and whatever your skills are, whatever you're studying, there's a way to get involved with climate change.
I have a project coming up that's a little off topic. It's not with the energy efficiency and that, but I know that y'all have heard about the manatees and the habitat and its destruction. So we're going to be doing volunteer recruitment to restore the habitat for the manatees, and that would entail planting oysters and clams and identifying manatees that may be seen to be in trouble, because we are putting a lot of money into rehabilitation facilities throughout the state of Florida, not just SeaWorld. So that was part of our discussion today in committee, is that we're going to be expanding the rest of the manatee rehabilitation centers throughout the state. So I'm sorry, that's the only thing I had, because I couldn't think of anything that we were doing with the other than writing letters. We always could use them. So, but I did want to bring that up because it's something that people do care a lot.
We'll jump in and help you with that, Senator Stewart.
Absolutely. And everyone loves the opportunity to be able to roll up their sleeves and get dirty every once in a while. So no, that is a great opportunity. And it is also great to hear you say, Senator Stewart, about letters, writing letters to your representatives and your senators and your public officials. I think you would agree that they do really look at them and read them and appreciate hearing from their constituents. So a letter can go a long way.
Even a letter to the editor. I mean, I think that the power of the written word is sometimes overlooked. People read those, and it sometimes will spark a fire that then goes on. So even if somebody out there is the writing is their thing, but they really want to plug in somewhere about climate change, that being a sort of semi professional letter to the editor writer around the state of Florida, it does get read.
That's great to hear. So I want to go ahead and open it up to our audience and see if any of our attendees have questions for any of our panelists. So one question that is in the chat is, who do we contact for volunteering for any of the things mentioned above, writing letters or helping with cleanup? So who would they contact if they wanted to get involved, for example, with the manatee habitat restoration?
I don't know if she can. Senator Stewart, how would they get involved with the manatee?
I am sorry. I didn't know who that question was directed to. Yes, our Fish and Wildlife is the one putting the training together for the manatee thing. Environmental Protection Department through the state may have volunteer opportunities also. So you can write, you can go on their website and write to either of those.
What about if the student wanted to get involved with Orange County's sustainability efforts?
So if you just, if you follow my office really on Instagram or Facebook, we post all kinds of, we partner with a lot of nonprofit partners out there in the community to try to get volunteer activities going. And sometimes we do supply drives or we'll do other type cleanups. So it's Nicole Wilson. Actually, you know what? I think you put my nicole.wilson@ocfl.net email address. If you want to email me there, and then on Facebook, it's Commissioner Nicole Wilson, Orange County, Florida, I believe. In fact, email me, I'll make sure I'll get you the links for all the social media pages, because we'll put events out sometimes, which is nice, because then you can see if it's a, you know, a Saturday morning cleanup that may work, or something that's, you know, on an evening to do either letter writing or whatever, so we can kind of keep you updated as events come up.
Thank you. And then another question came in. Is there anything that human beings can do regarding volcanoes which cause climate change? I think we might start with Professor Adamski.
Yes,
on that one.
I'll take that one. Yeah, well, that's a couple of answers there. Volcanoes in geologic time have caused climate change because volcanoes do emit carbon dioxide gas. Right now, we're actually at a relatively low period in Earth history as far as volcanism goes. So there's not really a lot of volcanoes spewing out carbon dioxide gas. What we do see is we see that most of the carbon dioxide gas is coming from humans. It's coming from the burning of fossil fuels. And we can do that from a couple of different ways. We can actually do what we call a mass balance, which is basically, you know, kind of sum up all the stuff that's coming out of coal-fired power plants and cars and trucks and planes, and then measure and sum up what's coming out of volcanoes. And we see that the stuff coming from humans is much, much, much larger, much more voluminous than the stuff coming out of volcanoes. As far as if volcanoes were to increase in the future and start having an effect on climate change, no, there's not really anything we can do about that. Yeah, it's we don't have the technology to do that, to answer the second part of that question.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Since we don't have another question just yet, I can tag on something on the volcano question. A bigger question of kind of natural tipping points is something that often comes up in discourse of, you know, what happens if there's natural systems that, you know, start emitting and then they create a feedback loop where other things emit, you know, melting of permafrost, which is, you know, these frozen areas of soil where then more greenhouse gases can come out of that. Those things are really scary. I think that's what keeps up at night a lot of people who work on climate change and are passionate about addressing climate change. But the best thing to do about those is to reduce emissions where we can to prevent those tipping points from taking effect. Because there are certain things, there's parts of the earth that are beyond our control, and that's kind of a terrifying thing to realize, but there are things that are in our control. And so that makes it all the more important to go to some of the solutions that we mentioned earlier in the conversation.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And that's one of the reasons why scientists, you know, that 1.5 and 2 degrees Celsius cutoff points aren't arbitrary. Those are there in hopes of stopping some of those tipping points that you're talking about. Yeah, so, and there are a number of them. Right now we see the parts of the Amazon rainforest which has historically been a carbon sink, absorbing more carbon dioxide than it emits. Parts of it are actually turning into a carbon source. So they're emitting more carbon dioxide than they're capturing, and for a variety of different reasons, from drought to fires to clear cutting.
So we can't end on that note, on a sad note. So quick, oh, we do have, okay, we have one question. I think we have time in the chat. Does state or local government support the concept of buildings, rooftops, landscape engineering designs? Are you asking, just so we make sure that we understand it, like green roofs? Green rooftops? Is that kind of the, where you're going with that, Mr. Howard?
No, nothing I can speak to.
Well, I mean, I can say that within that Vision 2050 and the code updates, we're looking at trying to think as many ways as possible about using some of those spaces, understanding that the land mass itself, the land that we have is not infinite. So using landscaping or using areas that were not traditionally used for gardening or for growing things, and making sure that it's codified in a way that those uses are protected, is something that we are trying to make sure that we're including.
Thank you. So we are almost at time, but I just want to make sure we end on a positive note. So if each panelist, really quick, 20 seconds, could share what gives you hope. Climate change is big and ferocious and overwhelming, but what gives you hope that keeps you, getting up in the morning working on this topic? Whoever wants to go first.
Who's going
Students.
first?
Students give me hope.
I would say things like this, where I get to hear from experts in their fields and understand that I'm not that it's not a singular existential crisis, and that humanity has encountered its own demise before and managed to somehow make it through. So I believe in that kind of innovation, and I believe in the creativity that people have to solve problems. So I keep, get up every day. I call myself a masochistic optimist, because I get up every day and get back to work at it, thinking that, with enough of that persistence, we will right the ship.
I would say that new technology is a daily effort, and we need to stay in touch with everyone who has suggestions, because you have to not dismiss people that have suggestions, because some of them have really good ideas, and we need to be open-minded to everything, because it's going to take all of us to make these changes. And I think that there's a willingness out there to see us moving forward and not behind.
Mr. Soltoff.
Yeah, it's an honor to have the last word with this group, but so I'd say all of the above, and particularly young people, not just students, even teenagers. Young people are the ones who are going to have to deal with this crisis, and young people are so motivated to go out and address it, and that's really inspiring.
Perfect. And shameless plug, tomorrow we're talking about how students can get involved with local community groups. So Fleet Farming will be here, Friends of Wekiva River. So tomorrow at 10 a.m., same link. We will be here talking about how students can get involved with the local community organizations, as well as then at 11:30, talking with Nate Douglas, who's the youngest ever elected.
Nate Douglas is my buddy.
Yes, see, so you've got to be here tomorrow at 11:30. So start at 10, and then 11:30 we'll be wrapping up our conference then. Same Zoom link, and all the sessions will be recorded and then posted on our YouTube channel after the conference. A huge thank you to all of our panelists tonight for coming. It was such a great conversation. I wish we had more time. So thank you so much for your perspectives and your insight, and for being here and sharing it with our Valencia students. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, and thank you. It was so nice to meet everybody.
Yes, and I just wanted to, I just wanted to send a huge thanks to Carrie and her team for not only this wonderful session, but all the amazing work that she's been doing at the college and in our community. It really doesn't go unnoticed.
Absolutely.
If you need anything, Carrie, reach out.
Okay, thank you. Thank you guys so much. Have a great evening, everyone, and thank you to all of our wonderful attendees. Thanks. Have
Bye.
a great one.